this whole message is one of restoration completely. It's all about restoration. And that's what we're looking at. So what I'm finding is that there's a lot out there that understand the priesthood message, and they understand the Book of the Covenant and the Book of the Law. But as I was talking to Jeanette the other day, and I'd like to have your feedback maybe when we get to the get done with this, is, you know what? If you don't have the covenant calendar to go with the priesthood and to go with the Book of the Covenant and Book of the Law, what do you really have? Do you really have the 3-strand cord if you don't have the right calendar? So we know priesthood is really important, and of course covenant laws and instructions are important as well, because that's part of restoration. But if you're not on the right calendar, you're not walking in Yahushua's footsteps, in his worship statutes, that's what the calendar shows us, how to find the worship statutes. What do you really have? Do you really have the true Messiah? Really, really. You're not really restored. And so the calendar in this particular study is really, really huge. So how did this all start? Well, as we were learning the feasts and festivals years and years ago, this is what I constantly heard. And I don't know about you, but this is the way it was for me. That when you get to Exodus 19 and 20, and basically feast keepers all say, well, that is pretty much Shabbat, okay? That's what they say. That's pretty much Pentecost. And we all just accepted it. But you know what? Nobody ever proved to me that this was actually Pentecost. Nobody ever did that. And I never even questioned it. One of the hardest things to do when you're coming up to learning new truths or whatever is to learn to question even things that you took for granted. And that part's hard because sometimes you don't know what to question. But anyway, I never questioned it. This study smacks it. It tells you exactly where this is. And guess where it starts? In the very first verse of Exodus 19. So I'm not going to do too much with the very first encounter, except to tell you that the first encounter that Moses had with Mount Sinai was at the burning bush. And that was way back there in Exodus chapter 3. Basically, this whole study is from the book of Exodus. In Exodus chapter 3, I'll just give you the verses, and you don't have to take notes. You just enjoy this, because I can send you a paper easily, and it's, yeah, we'll send you a study paper. It's just table form, that's all it is, real easy. And so I just want you to enjoy it. But anyway, in Exodus chapter 3, that's where Yahuwah calls Moses at the burning bush, and he says, I'm going to need you to deliver Egypt. Well, why? Because Yahuwah wants to restore his people back to him completely. He doesn't want them in Egypt anymore, surrounded by that bondage and by those pagan gods and those Egyptian ways. He just said, it's time to restore. Why? Because there was a promise made to Abraham. 400 or 430 years, depending which way you work the timeline, there was a promise made to Abraham 400 years before that there was going to be a deliverance. And with deliverance comes restoration. So that was the first encounter, okay? I don't know if the bush was up in Mount Sinai, but it was actually there in that location where Moses is going to be called to take this responsibility. Now, I can't do the lineup of how Moses got chosen to be this priest. That's another study, but he was chosen. Now, he's the second born. I believe Miriam was the oldest, I think, but Aaron was older than Moses by 3 years. So what you'll find in the priesthood study is that it always skips the firstborn. The priesthood always went to the secondborn. That's something important to remember as well. But anyway, Moses is chosen to be the priest. And you know what he says? He says, well, I can't do this. I can't talk. I stutter or whatever it is. He said, it's just not going to be me. It just can't. Why don't you go get Aaron? And Yah says, no, I will use Aaron as a mouthpiece. but you're the one I'm going to work with. It's going to be all through you. So as you see this, Moses is going to act as the mediator. He's the one, he's the go-between. Just very interesting. But before we get into anything, this is the most important part, to start with an introduction of what is this covenant all about, and how do we know that it's an everlasting covenant. And I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but it's a good review if you know it, and if you don't know it, this is really important. There are 4 requirements to have an everlasting covenant. 4 requirements that you will always find. You'll find these 4 requirements in the story of Laban and Jacob there in Genesis. And you'll also find requirements with Yahweh and Abram in Genesis 15, but we're going to see it here again for the 3rd time. First requirement, this is with a covenant with Yahuwah. He has to propose the covenant. He has to make a proposal, like, will you come into covenant with me? That's number 1. Number 2 is an acceptance. There always has to be another party in the covenant, right? There has to be more than one. So the accepting party or the other party has to say yes or no. So the second part of the covenant is an acceptance. The third part is there has to be blood ratification. Blood has to be spilled. This is part of the covenant that basically is saying that if either party breaks the covenant, there's going to be a death penalty. Somebody is going to have to die. If you break the covenant, that's too bad. It's just like if you go to buy a car, you make a covenant with the dealership that says, yes, I would like to have your car, and I will give you $1,000 a month until the car is paid. And the dealership says, well, that sounds good to us, and away you go. But guess what? If you don't make your car payments, they're going to come and say, I want my car back. So whoever breaks the covenant is the one that's in Dutch, right? So blood ratification. And in those days, it was understood that when there was blood ratification to seal a covenant forever, that there was a death penalty that went along with it. And I'm going to show you that today in these Exodus verses. And then the last part, number 4, is that the covenant had to be sealed. And it was sealed with a meal, a fellowship meal, a meal that said, there will not be anything taken out of this covenant. We're not going to add to it. We're not going to change it around. It's going to stay exactly like this. Even the fine print, the large print and the fine print, everything stays the way it is. You cannot add or cannot subtract. Okay, this is a covenant between Yahuwah and the people. That means that even Yahuwah is bound by this covenant. That means that he can't add and he can't take away either. So this is the understanding of this whole study today. Well, let's start out in Exodus 19, verse 1. That's where this whole thing begins. And I'm just going to start. Verse 1 is really, really important. It says, in the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, and then it says, on the same day. Now, we have emphasized this a lot in the Joshua Sickle studies, the same day that they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Okay, just read it very carefully, very literally for what it says. It says, in the 3rd month after they had left Israel and gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day that they left Egypt. Well, we had already done some studies on the Egypt Passover, and Tim discovered that that was a Tuesday Passover, a 3rd cycle of the week. And we know from our studies that they left the next day early in the morning, which was the first Sabbath of unleavened bread, and that was a Wednesday, the midst of the week. Okay, everybody take note. It says the same day. It does not say the same date. When they left Egypt, it was the 15th of the month. It does not say that they're coming into the 3rd month, into this area on the 15th date of the month. They're coming in on the same day. It is the Wednesday, the fourth cycle of the week. Okay, and we had been counting the Omer. Okay, we had figured all that out. But anyway, this is your first clue right here of what's going on so that you can count this Omer. And it said, this is where they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because this is your foundation. Let's go back to Egypt for just a little bit. They had their Passover and they left the next morning, Wednesday morning. They traveled 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then, Tim, what happened on Friday? At the end of Friday, what happened after that third day of travel?
They took the baptism of water. They crossed through the Red Sea on that preparation night. That was their salvation today.
That was their salvation today from the Egyptians. They were not under those Egyptians anymore. And that was the night that Pharaoh and all of his army was drowned in the Red Sea waters. And the very next morning, as dawn was breaking, when the sea covered up, that was a Sabbath. Okay, now we know from a study in the Torah that the day after the Sabbath, within the week of unleavened bread, is the day of wave sheaf or first fruits, however you understand it. So the wave sheaf was the day following the Sabbath. Well, they were not told to observe the wave sheaf. Those instructions came later, and the instructions were that you're not going to observe the wave sheaf until you come into the land, okay? But we know they didn't get into the land for 40 some years. But even though Moses and the Hebrews, and of course Egypt, probably wouldn't know anything about counting these days. I don't know if Moses was counting or not, but I know somebody was counting, and that was Yahuwah. He was counting because he knew that the instructions were going to be in 50 days of Omer count, you're going to be at Mount Sinai. That's how it's going to work. So although we don't have any instructions here in Exodus 19 about this wave sheaf, we had figured out where that wave sheaf was. And when I was working here in Exodus 19, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, where I'm going to show you some calendar language in chapter 19. Chapter 19 is extremely important. Don't skip it, okay? If you skip this chapter, you may get lost in the rest of the study. That's why I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. So let's just get started, and then I'll tell you the rest of the story. So they came into the wilderness of Sinai, and this is Omer 46. I'll give you that clue. This is Omer 46 when this happened. Verse number 2, for they had departed from Rephidim and had come to the desert of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. And so Israel camped there before the mountain. So it appears to me that on the 46th, they entered the wilderness. And then on the next day, they must have moved and gone a short ways later, just a short distance, it seems like, till they got to the mountain. So at the mountain, this would be Omer 47. That's really important. You might want to pencil that in your Bible, okay? Now we're going to start these trips. And I didn't know what to look for. But you know what, everybody? If I would have just read the literal words in the Bible, I would have seen it. And that's what I want to show you today. In verse 3, it says, and Moses went up to Yahuwah, and Yahuwah called him from the mountain. Well, right there is trip number 2. I'm going to call it trip number 2. Moses went up. That's not hard to find, but I'm going to tell you that I was not taught to read the literal words of the scriptures and apply them. This is the story. This is an old story. We're going to have some commands, okay, some commands from Yahuwah, but this is the narrative. This is the story. So I want you to learn how to read the story. And this is what Yahuwah says. He's giving instructions to Moses, and he says, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, Jeanette is going to tell you something about these eagle wings, because this is also important. I just love this part. Jeanette?
Okay. A few years ago, I have heard a couple different versions of teachings, biblical versions of relating the symbolism of using the eagle terminology. And so they clearly showed how in real life, how eagles operate. And so how they carry their young. And so even for, it's the mother usually is what they said that teaches the young or the eaglets how to fly. And so she'll take an eaglet on her back, she puts it up on her back, and then when she raises her wings to fly, it creates or cradles the little one in between the wings and the back of the neck, right? It's like cupping your hand, it's like holding it in the palm of your hand. And so she flies away and carries this eaglet high up, and then she drops it. And so of course the eaglet has to flutter and try to, you know, figure out its wings or whatever. But the mother nose dives completely down underneath the little one, picks it up again, cradles it, goes back up really high again, and does the same thing. And she keeps repeating that until the little one figures out its wings and figures out how to fly. And so it's just kind of a cool analogy how we also are called the children of Yahuwah, or the children of Israel, and how Yahuwah is teaching us little by little, right from like baby steps, how to follow his way and follow his covenant. So yeah, it is kind of a cool analogy.
Oh, that is so great. That's not in my handout, by the way, so you'll have to remember that. Yes, and so the interesting part about this whole thing is that Yahuwah's covenant, his instructions are so easy. They're not complicated and hard to figure out. He keeps them really easy so that we can walk in those footsteps. But anyway, let's go on. He said, I bore you in eagle's wings and I brought you to myself. And he absolutely did, with all the miracles that happened with the plagues of Egypt and those 3 hard days of journey and going through the Red Sea, he absolutely did carry them. Now, therefore, he continues, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep, hear and obey, that's Shema, keep my covenant, then, okay, this is an if and a then. If you do this, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. Now, don't forget, we're going to find out in a little bit that Yah actually calls these people a stiff-necked people. But right here, he's saying, you know, he already knows they're stiff-necked, but he says, I want you to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Wow, he wants to crown them, you know, take them out of their slavery and crown them. Okay, so that was the message that Yah gave to Moses at the top of trip number 2 there. Well, look what it says in verse 7. So Moses came and called for the children of the people. Well, if he came to the people, then obviously he had to come back down the mountain. That's pretty obvious, you know, he wasn't there at the top. So he actually came back down and he called for the people. And it says, I'm in the New King James, by the way, and he laid before them all these words which Yah had commanded. What words? There wasn't much there, except for I just want you to come into covenant with me and be a holy people and a kingdom of priests. That's all it was. There wasn't too much else. There was no instructions there. It was just a proposal. Will you come into covenant with me? You've seen what I've done for you. You've seen how I delivered you. You've seen all the things I've done for you on these last 10 campsites. Are you going to trust me? Like, really, Yahuwah did a lot of fireworks there in order to gain their trust. It was a lot. Then verses 8 and 9 are so important in this study. I don't want you to forget them. Then all the people answered together and said, all that Yahweh has spoken, we will do. So they accepted the proposal the first time. This is the first of 3 times they are going to accept this 3 times. This is the first time. So they must have thought, well, hey, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, he's a pretty good, great Elohim there. Yeah, we can come into covenant with him. We can trust him, okay? Then the last part of verse 8, look what it says. So Moses brought back the words of the people to Yahweh. So what did he do? He went back up the mountain. So this is trip number 3, okay? He went back and he took the words of the people. He's the intercessor, the mediator. He's doing the communicating back and forth. Verse 9 is really interesting. And Yahweh said to Moses, listen to this, everybody. Behold, I come to you in a thick cloud. Now listen what he says. That the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. This is the most important part of this study to understand what's going to happen in the next chapter. And how did I miss this all my years? Yah says, I'm coming to you in a thick cloud up here at the top of the mountain, and I'm telling you what's going on. But guess what, Moses? Everybody at the bottom of the mountain can hear what we're talking about, so that when you go back down the mountain and you give them my words, they know that you didn't change anything. You didn't add anything. You didn't take anything away, so that they can know that what I said is what you're telling them, and it's true, so they can trust you. This is extremely important. So what does it say next? Moses told the words of the people to Yahuwah. Then he's up at the mountain. This is trip number 3. He's up there, number 3. Then Yah said to Moses, go to the people. Now here's the first part of the instructions. And sanctify them. Everybody, calendar language is coming up. Sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. Okay, what is it? We were at day number 47. Okay, so 47 is today. That's Omer count 47. Tomorrow is Omer count 48. And there's going to be the next day coming up. Okay. Or no, did I get that right, Tim? Today, tomorrow. No, today is 48. Tomorrow is 49. Yes. And I don't have it marked here. So that's why everybody should mark their Bible. So today is 48. Tomorrow is 49, and then there's going to be the next day, or the third day. That's day 50. Okay, and let them be ready for the third day. That's day number 50. That's Shavuot. For on the third day, Yahweh will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of the people. Okay, so there's calendar language here. Well, guess what, everybody? Tim had been working on this, and he didn't tell me. I hadn't been working here. But when this was way back years ago, 2015, okay, I didn't look in this chapter because there was no dawn day information in here, but there's a lot of calendar language in here. Remember, we're looking to see if we can nail down that this is actually Shavuot with a date, okay? That's what we're looking for. And actually, it started out with actually the 4th day of the month would have been Omer count number 46. And you're going to see that with Eric later on today. Okay, so here's the instructions. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches this mountain, what does it say? You will be put to death. It's a death penalty right there. Don't even think about it, okay? And Yahweh makes this very, really clear. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether it's a man or a beast, he shall not live. Yahuwah is saying, don't even think about this. Make sure your cattle are far away. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. Well, so Moses goes back down the mountain to tell the people and to sanctify the people, and they wash their clothes. So this is where he's coming back down from trip number 3. And he said to the people, giving them the instructions, Now, what did I tell you back there in verse 9? Yah told Moses, everything I tell you up here in a dark cloud, in the thick cloud, the people at the bottom can hear. Okay, so now Moses is coming and giving the instructions. He says, be ready for the third day. Do not come near your wives. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning, calendar language, that, listen, there was thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp, were they shouting for joy and jumping around and dancing? They were trembling. They were scared to death. I just want you to put yourself in their place right now. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of this with the Pentecost program with T4 here in a few hours if we get done. What do you think you would have felt like if you would have heard this going on? It said that the camp trembled. Okay, everyone in the camp trembled. It wasn't the camp trembling, it was the people in the camp that were trembling. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with Yahweh, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. This is the third day. This is the Pentecost Shavuot day, okay? Now it's giving you a little more information. Mount Sinai was completely on smoke because Yahuwah had descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked. So we have thunder, we have lightning, we have fire, we have smoke, and we have a trumpet, okay? This is really something. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and Yah answered him by voice. Then Yahweh came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and look what it says. And Yahweh called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. That's trip number 4. This is on Pentecost. So Yah is calling Moses back up to the mountain. Well, what in the world for? Here we go in verse 21. And Yah said to Moses, now I want you to go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at me, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near to Yahweh sanctify themselves, lest I break out against them. And this is what Moses says in verse 23. He says, Yahuwah, the people know. They know they're not supposed to come near this mountain because you already warned us. Set bounds around the mountain and sanctify it. Like they're not going to come close. You don't have to worry. That's what Moses was saying. I think he was right. Then Yahweh said to him, all right, away, get down, get out of here, So he's going back down the mountain. This is trip number 4. Get down. And now he's giving some other instructions. He's saying the next time you come up here, it's supposed to be with Aaron, okay? It says when you come up, you're going to have Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through and come up to me, lest I break out against them. So right here, Yah is telling Moses, this is your 4th time with this mountain. There's going to be another one, okay? The next time I tell you to come up, you're coming up with Aaron. But what we're going to find out happens in the next chapter is Moses goes up without a command from Yahweh, okay? That's going to be number 5. Okay, so he's coming down the mountain, and he went down to the people and he spoke to them. So he's giving them a second warning, don't come near the mountain. All right, that chapter is extremely important. There's a lot of principles in there. I want you to enjoy that chapter because it sets the foundation for everything that's going to happen. Now we're going to go fast. I'm not going to read every word, but I had to do every word in chapter 19. You all know that in Exodus 20, that's where Yahuwah starts to speak the first part of his covenant. And it's called the 10 Commandments. Many of your Bibles might have a heading there that says 10 Commandments or the 10 Words or something like that. And he's going along. Remember, there's smoke, there's fire, there's thunder, there's lightning, there's earthquakes, there's trumpet sound. I'm sure his voice sounds like a trumpet. I mean, it's thundering. Nobody's going to have any lack of hearing. He gets to the end of the 10th command in verse 17. This is where you need to pay attention to what's happening in the story. Can somebody read verse 18 for me? Johnny, I'm going to call on Johnny if he's there.
I'm here.
Okay, Johnny, verse 18.
And all the people saw the thunders and lightning flashes, the sound of the ram's horn, and the mountain smoking. And the people saw it, and they trembled and stood at a distance.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Johnny.
Welcome.
Well, there you go. The mountain is still thundering, lightning flashing, sounds of a trumpet, it's smoking, and those people did not go near the mountain. They stood back. They were scared to death. What if it was you and me? Would we be feeling the same way after everything that had happened, all the trauma in their lives? We might be thinking, wow, this Elohim, he's a little different than what we thought. They were scared. They were not going near that mountain. But look what happens next. Then they said to Moses, you know what? This is kind of scary. Why don't you go speak for us? You speak with us and we will hear. But let not Yahweh speak with us. Well, we're going to die. Well, why did they say that to Moses? Because Moses had been up and down the mountain 3 times in chapter 19, everybody. And every time he was at the top of the mountain and Yah was giving instructions, they could hear it. And when Moses came down the mountain, he gave them the instructions and they were exactly the same. And that was just cool. And they were used to that. But when Yahweh was talking to them, this just straight face to face, it was too much. And they said, Moses, you go up, you go get the words. And when you're at the top, we're going to hear the words. And then when you come down and tell us the words, we're going to know they're the same. And that's cool. That's what they wanted. They were so frightened. And Moses said to the people, you don't have to be afraid, for Yah is coming to test you. And he wants you to fear him. And he doesn't want you to sin. You don't have to be afraid. Just listen. But it says in verse 21, the people stood afar off. They backed up even further. They said, no, we're not going for that. We know that other plan works a whole lot better. We just want plan number 1, not plan number 2, is basically what they're saying. Then it says, Moses drew near the thick darkness where Yah was. Everybody, that's trip number 5, up the mountain. That's at the request of the people. That is not what Yahweh said. This is at the request of the people. Moses is going up this mountain the 5th time. And now we're going to get the rest of the covenant, okay? The rest of the covenant that Yahuwah would have spoken to the people had they just listened. They would have heard the rest of the covenant from his lips, from the thunder and the smoke and the fire and the lightning and the quaking and the trumpet. They would have heard it from his words, his mouth. So anyway, I'm going to kind of go through this next part very quickly. If you have headings in your Bible, you'll be able to follow a lot easier. The very first instructions of the next part of the covenant in my Bible is called the law of the altar. It's verses 22 to 26, the last verses of chapter 20. Now, I've read those verses many times over the years, and honestly, everybody, I could not understand why those scriptures were there about a law of the altar. That never made any sense to me, never. But when you understand the priesthood, and when you understand that there's going to be a book of the law that has a sanctuary with everything decked, then you'll understand why this is here. The very first instructions are, now this is the way I want you to worship me. At an altar, just ordinary stones. Don't put a tool on it. I don't want you to have stairs on it like the pagans. I don't want it to be anything like the pagan altars. Just set it up. It says, verse 25, you can read the verses later, but verse 25, and if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. Nor shall you go up by steps. Apparently the pagans had steps up to their altar, that your nakedness will not be exposed. So Yahuwah is saying, this is the first thing you need to know, is how you're going to worship me. Just a plain altar, just set up the stones, and that's it. Wherever you go, that's all I'm asking. It wasn't supposed to be a fancy tabernacle or a temple or anything like that. Okay. I'm thinking that's pretty important. He's given them some instructions already, those first 10 commands. Now he's saying, now this is how I want you to worship me. Now I'm going to go through chapters 21, 22, and 23. Those words are the rest of the words of the covenant. And there's around 3,000 words in the whole covenant. That is not a lot of words, 3,000 words. You can read it in about 20 minutes. The very first set of laws in chapter 21 is verses 1 to 11. And it's laws concerning servants. If you have servants, this is how you treat them. Well, guess what, everybody? I don't have any servants, but I know some of our covenant calendar friends in Africa do have servants. So if they have servants, there's laws here on how to treat your servants, even today. These laws are laws to govern a whole nation of people, not just one patriarchal family. So what you're going to find here in these covenant laws is how to govern a whole nation for the whole time that this earth is dealing with the sin problem. In verse 12 to verse 27, there's laws concerning violence. Well, those are pretty good. Laws concerning violence, you should maybe know about that. And then in verses 28 to 36, the last part of chapter 21, are laws about animal control. Well, that's pretty good, because if somebody's ox comes and gores your ox, you need to know how to fix up that property damage, right? So Yah saying this is what you're going to have to do. Now, these are just basic laws. When you come to the rest of Torah, you may have a lot more detail about these covenant laws, but these are kind of like the large print, okay? There can be small print for the covenant laws that come later. Chapter 22, verses 1, well, the whole chapter is responsibility for property. So Yah is saying, you know what? These are some things you need to know in a general outline. Just read them. They're good laws. But I want to point out verse 20, okay? Because we talked about this being a blood ratified covenant, and there's death penalties to it. Right here in verse 20, this is what it says. He who sacrifices to any god except to Yahuwah only. Tim, what does it say after that in verse 20? If you sacrifice to any god except Yahuwah, then what does it say?
Is they're put under the ban. That is the death sentence.
That's the death penalty, everybody. And I want you to notice, thank you so much, Tim, for being a minute man, or second man. I want you to notice that when I read these laws the first time, I missed that verse. Okay, I missed that. This is part of the covenant. Yah told them, if you sacrifice to any other gods, you shall be utterly destroyed. That's what this is all about. I want you to be in covenant with only me, nobody else. Don't even think about it. Okay, let's go on to chapter 23. It's talking about laws that are justice for all. And that goes to verse 9, basically justice for all. You can read it through, but now comes my favorite part. Verses 10 to 17. You know, when you're in a conversation with somebody, a big, long conversation, usually what you remember the most is what you heard the last, right? You might have been there for 2 hours, but the very last thing they told you is really what you remember. And that's what Yah's doing. He's ending up with the laws of the worship statutes at the very end. I just think that is so cool. And he starts out in verse 10, he starts out about the 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its produce. And in the 7th year you let the land rest. You all know about that. And then look what happens in verse 12. He's talking about the weekly Sabbath there, okay? 6 days shall you do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, your ox and your donkey. We already had that in commandment number 4 back there in Exodus 20, but here's a review. Don't forget, 6 days you work, and if you want to keep the Sabbath, you need to work 6 days first, right? Not just slough around. And so everybody in your household, even the donkeys and the work animals, get to rest. Verse 13, we may as well read it. And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other gods on your lips, nor let it be heard from your mouth. So he's not too happy about these other gods. And then in verse 14, 3 times a year shall you keep a feast to me in the year. And we know that's Feast of Unleavened Bread, and he talks about them there, the Feast of Harvest in verse 16, the Feast of Ingathering from your labors, and the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year. Verse 17, another reminder, 3 times in the year, all your males shall appear before me. The last part of the covenant is talking about the worship statutes. I think that's really neat. Then from verses 20 to 33, there's promises, all kinds of promises that Yahweh gives to them. If they'll come into covenant, then these promises will follow if they are obedient. Pretty simple. The rules are pretty simple. Okay. Verse 33 or 32. Let me read 32 and 33, because what you're going to find in this study is there's 2 things being emphasized the most. Don't have anything to do with pagan gods, and remember how to worship me. It's always about worship and these other gods. 32, you shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare unto you. And that's exactly what happened. That's the story of the whole Old Testament after Moses died. Okay. We're getting into the good part, and Tim's going to help me a little bit here at the end. He's going to give you a little testimony. Verse 1 of chapter 24. Yahuwah said to Moses, he's basically saying to him, you're going to come up here again. Remember back in Exodus 19, it was, where there at the end, verse 24. In Exodus 19:24, remember Yahuwah said, you're going to come up here with Aaron. When I call you up here again, you're going to come with Aaron. Well, this is the time. He's now saying, when you come up to me again, you're going to come up to me with Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, those were his 2 sons, and 70 elders, and you're going to worship from afar. So Yahuwah is telling Moses, right now, you're going to be coming up here again, but the next time you come, it's going to be with quite a few other people, okay? And it says, you will come alone near to me, but they will not come near to me, and no other people will go up. Now, verse 3, this is where I just love this. So what did Moses do? He came down and he told the people all the words of Yahweh and all the judgments. See, we're reading some judgments as well, right? And number 2, all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which Yah has said, we will do. The second time that they promised that they would keep this covenant, they accepted it. Now, don't forget that when Moses was up in the mountain, talking in that cloud, and this is still all Pentecost, this is still all the day of Shavuot, okay, the people could hear what Yah was saying to Moses at the top. So when he, excuse me, told the words to the people, of course they agreed because the words were the same. Then it says, and Moses wrote all the words of Yahweh. And he rose early in the morning. So this is the next day. He rose early in the morning and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and peace offerings of oxen. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. There's your blood ratification. That's the third component of this covenant. Then Moses took the book of the covenant. Now it's got a name. And he read all the words in the hearing of the people. So what did he do? He told the words to the people. They said, yes, everything Yah has said we will do. Then he wrote the words. Now he's reading the words that are in the book. And the people heard the words and they're going, the words are all the same. Nothing has changed. And they said something a little bit different this time. Tim, what did they say in your Bible? Verse 7.
All that Yahuwah has spoken, we shall do and obey.
And be obedient. So before, the first two times, they said, everything he said we will do. Everything he has said we will do, but not this time. This time they said, and be obedient. Now, don't forget, they also agreed that they weren't going to sacrifice to other gods. Remember back there in verse 20 of chapter 22? You gotta remember that. And Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold the blood of the covenant, which Yahweh has made with you according to all these words. Now, Tim, would you tell us what you learned not too long ago? Before we go up the mountain the sixth time.
Okay. I had been listening to Matthew Nolan since the days that he was speaking with Jim Staley. And so I was eagerly listening to Matthew when he's talking about the book of the covenant and the book of the law. And it all made perfect sense to me. I quite accepted it readily, and it was great. Oh, I had one problem. I did not know how to find my foundation for book of the covenant. Where did that book of the covenant from? Where did it come from? And I'm reading my scriptures here, and I'm going to take us back to verse 4. Remember, okay, I'm looking for meat. I need to find how that this book of the covenant came to fruition. I'm looking for meat. Verse 4. And Mosheh wrote down all the words of Yahuwah and rose up early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. Oh, I had been studying dawn. He woke up at dawn and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain. That's pretty cool. And 12 standing columns for the 12 tribes of Yisrael. There's some pretty good stuff there. But what did I miss? What did I read over? That was the absolute base foundation. I missed this. I need to learn how to read my scriptures. I need to learn that there is every word in the scriptures is worth reading. There is not one word that is not valuable. I'll read it to you again. And Mosheh wrote. What did he write? What did he write on? And if he was writing, what was produced from that writing? When you write a bunch of words, does it become a book? Could that be the book of the covenant? I tell you, it took me a long time. When I wrote, I remember calling up Charlene and going, oh, because I had missed this, a simple little tiny word that I thought was insignificant was the foundation of the book of the covenant. I need to learn how to read.
I think, Tim, this is what you told me, and correct me if I'm incorrect. that you thought when Moses came down from that trip number 5 that he had the 10 commandments in his hands on the tables of stone. Is that what you thought?
No, I don't think that was it. No, no.
Well, anyway, some people do. Some people think that when he came down from the mountain, that he had the 10 tables of stone, but some people do think that. But anyway, whatever you're thinking, it's pretty clear right here what was going on if you just read the words, okay? Now, what was in those words? The weekly Sabbath, the feasts and festivals, and don't worship any other gods. Those, to me, those are the most important. If you're going to be in covenant with me, you have to be on my worship statutes and far away from those pagan gods or those pagan ways or any other kind of worship. If you're sharing this with other people that are Sabbath keepers that have nailed the feasts and festivals to the cross, right here is where you can show them, and you need to explain how a blood ratification covenant works, okay? That means this is forever, forever. And Yah does not lie, he cannot change, and he doesn't change at the cross. This is forever, these laws. And I did this with 2 ladies in their 80s in 2017. And it took me about this long to get through it because they couldn't understand why I and Irina were keeping the feasts. And I said, I'll show you from the book of Exodus. And after I got this far, and I said, do you understand how the feasts and festivals are forever? And they said, yes. And then the next thing they said to me is, this is so clear. We see it. But why are the pastors not teaching this? And I couldn't answer that question, everybody. The only thing I can say to you is, they're not reading the words. They're not reading the story. You have to read the story in Exodus 19 to get the foundation of what's going on here. You have to pay attention to what happened after the 10th commandment when the people stood afar off and they shoved Moses up the mountain. Our leaders are not reading the words, everybody. You know what? I didn't read the words either. It was only when I started to mark these trips of Moses going up and down the mountain that I actually read the words. And I have been taught, everybody, that you first read the words literally. And then if there's symbolism or something, then you do the second application. But first you just read the words, what they say. I cannot emphasize that enough. When you just read the story and just read the commands, it's all right there and you can't mess it up. All right, let's get going. Moses has to go back up. This is going to be trip number 6. This is an interesting number, number 6. This is a very different trip than every other trip because this trip is going to be a 6A, 6B, 6C trip. It's going to be 3 different steps up this mountain because we still have to finish this covenant agreement. All right, we have to get to that covenant confirming meal, number 4. And then this covenant is completely written in stone. Here we go, verse 9. Then Moses went up. Where? Up Mount Sinai. He went up. That's what it says. This is number 6. He took Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders. You have to know how to count, everybody. How many people is that? Somebody open your mic and tell me, how many is that?
74.
74.
74. You're counting right. But we are going to find out there's 75, okay? But right now it adds to 74. So they went up. Now look at verse 10. And they saw the Elohim of Israel. I wonder what that was like. What was that like to see the Elohim of Israel? And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But on the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. So they saw Elohim. I think it was a glory, a light. I think that's all it was, but they saw something. And then what does it say? Somebody, Sharon Clark, can you read to me what it says at the very end of verse 11? It says that they saw Elohim, and what did they do next?
Yet they did not stretch out his hand against the chiefs of the children of Israel, and they saw Elohim, and they ate and drank. There's the meal.
There you go. Thank you, Sharon. They ate and they drank. Okay, we know there's 74. They went partway up the mountain. Okay, so now just link into your logic and your common sense. We have 74 men for sure going up a mountain. They must be dragging a sacrifice with them. I don't know. It doesn't say no other women were there. They're doing this all by themselves. 75 men. Can you just imagine? They're going to make a meal here. They're going to eat and drink, and they're going to seal this covenant with a meal. What a nice way to seal the covenant, right? So they ate and they drank. All right. That is the end of basically the nutshell
Charlene,
of the covenant instructions.
Could that be they ate and drank the bread and the wine?
Oh, I'm sure they had bread, because I'm sure they did. I don't know what kind of bread they had, because they were getting manna at that point in time. And I don't know if there was grape juice at that point in time, but they were eating and drinking something, and there was most likely a sacrifice, was a peace offering. Burnt offerings were not eaten, only peace offerings, and they were called thank offerings. And there was there's another name. Can't think of it right now. It's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, the peace offering was the only sacrifice that they were allowed to eat. Okay, the people in general, and they could eat on the peace offering sacrifice for 2 days. All right, so it was probably a peace offering sacrifice. But what I want to tell you, the most important scriptures you want to write down right now are Genesis 1:1 to Exodus 24:11. And what we're understanding, that is the cutoff point there for understanding the covenant laws. That does not mean that there's not going to be another piece of instruction for covenant laws. This is the large print, because later on Moses will give you fine print for covenant laws in the large print. And that's the way covenants work. There's always the small print. But this is the cutoff point. No more laws can be added to the covenant after this verse that are new laws, okay? If there are laws that have extra fine print instruction for these laws, that's different, but no new covenant laws, okay? Let's go to verse 12. And this is the verse that was really tough for me to understand. And it's a cornerstone verse. Then Yahuwah said to Moses, "Come up to me in the mountain." Okay, now they are partway in the mountain already. So Yahuwah is saying, I want you to come a little further up the mountain, right there. This is still trip number 6, okay, because he hasn't gone down yet. And be there. And he says, I will give you tablets of stone. Now, in my Bible, the next word is and. I will give you tables of stone and the law and commandments, which I have written, that you may teach them. This is the problem, everybody, because we already know that nobody can add to the covenant that's been blood ratified. But Yah is saying, and I'm going to give you laws and commandments. How can he do that? So what's going on? This is where you know that Yahuwah knows the end from the beginning. Yahuwah knew what was going to happen. So that word and is a big Circle it in red. Do whatever you need to do with that word and, because that's adding something extra. Something extra is getting added. This is going to be your book of the laws, okay? But Moses probably doesn't know that yet. Let's continue on. So Moses arose with his assistant, Joshua. Well, how many now on the mountain? 74 plus Joshua is 75. How come Joshua wasn't mentioned before? Because what I'm going to show you in Exodus, that Joshua was in the training boots of Moses. He was training to be the next leader, okay? Not the next Melchizedek priest, but the next leader, okay? There's a difference there. Joshua was by Moses' side. He was an absolutely incredible man. He rose up with Joshua and went up to the mountain of Yahweh. But now it's just backtracking a little bit, and before Moses left, he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you, but if any man has a difficulty, let him go down to them. So Moses was, I don't think Moses knew he was going to be gone for 40 days, but he said to them, you wait here until we come back. That's important. Then it says, Moses went up into the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain. Now the glory of Yahweh rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. So he's going partway up the mountain with Joshua for 6 days. Joshua went with him, and the cloud covers them. And it says, on the 7th day, he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. So Moses is being called away from Joshua to go further up the mountain. He's going to go all the way up. It says in verse 17, the sight of the glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. Fire, you guys. Probably smoke. It might have still been quaking. I don't know, but it said it looked like fire, and Moses went up there. Verse 18, so Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain, and he was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Where was Joshua? Where was Joshua? Was Joshua waiting for Moses 40 days and 40 nights? We'll find out. Okay, so he's up there for 40 days and 40 nights. What's going on? Well, Yah said he would give him tablets of stone. Okay, so now we're going to go fast. Chapters 25 to the end of 31 are these extra laws that are going to be written in what's called a book of the law. And Moses is getting dictation or whatever he's doing. I think he's remembering it, but I'm just going to go through it. Because when people say, well, what's in the book of the law? It's really easy. Just summarize it like this. Everything to do with an Aaronic priesthood, everything to do with a sanctuary instead of simple altar of stone. A new priesthood, a different priesthood that's inferior, and a sanctuary with all the bells and whistles instead of a simple altar. So chapter 25, Moses is getting instructions for a sanctuary. It says offerings for the sanctuary. In verse 10, he's getting instructions for the Ark of the Testament. In verse 23, he has instructions for the table of showbread. Then in verse 31, instructions for the lampstand. It's all sanctuary furnishings. Chapter 26 is all about the tabernacle. Okay, chapter 27, we have the altar of burnt offering. In verse 9, it's talking about the court of the tabernacle. In verse 20, how you care for the lampstand. In chapter 28, look what happens. Yahuwah is giving Moses instructions for the garments of the priesthood. In verse 5, oh, there's an ephod, something very special. And then there's the breastplate in verse 15. And then in verse 31, other priestly garments. Well, if that's not all, look what happens in chapter 29. Moses is getting instructions that his brother Aaron and his sons are going to be consecrated into the priesthood. And I'm just kind of wondering if Moses is thinking, wait a second, I thought I was the priest. Like what's going on here? Don't you think he might have been wondering? But I don't think Moses asked any questions, not yet, okay? So there's all kinds of instructions here about Aaron and the sons taking up the priesthood. And you go on and on and on, all the way to verse 38, and it's talking about some daily offerings. And then chapter 30, the altar of incense. It talks about the ransom money in verse 11. And in verse 17, the bronze laver. And in verse 22, the anointing oil. In verse 34, the incense. Everything is about the sanctuary and the priesthood, all of it. All these extra laws about another priesthood and another way to worship in a sanctuary instead of at the altar. And then in chapter 31, Yah even tells Moses who's going to be given these special talents, the artisans for the building of the tabernacle. Do you remember what I said way back there in chapter 23? The last thing that Yahweh told Moses when he was getting to the end of the covenant was about the Sabbath. Do you remember that? Guess what happens? In chapter 31, verses 12 and onward, we have the Sabbath law. But there's something a little bit different that happens here. And maybe we can have this for a discussion. Someone write this down. Let me read verse 13. Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, surely my Sabbaths, plural, you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you. Now, pay attention, because you have not heard the next part before. The next part was not in the covenant. Everyone who profanes the Sabbath shall be put to death, for whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among the people. Am I right or am I wrong? Was there a death penalty in the covenant if you didn't keep the Sabbath? Work shall be done on the 6 days, but on the 7th is the Sabbath of rest, holy. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. This is the second time that Yahweh is reminding them about this. Not the first, but the second. Therefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath and observe the Sabbath throughout their generation as a what? Perpetual covenant. That means it doesn't end at the cross. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested and refreshed. Verse 18. And when he had made an end of speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses 2 tablets of the testimony of stone, written with the finger of Yahweh. Okay. That's the end of the covenant instructions. That's the end of the commands from Yahweh. In verse 32, we're going to pick up the story. Meanwhile, back at the ranch or down at the camp, something's been going on. Aaron did not stay on the mountain like he was told to. He left, and probably the rest of them did too. So in chapter 32, verses 1 to 6, you kind of have a backflash of what's been going on down at the camp. Okay, too bad it couldn't be written as a movie where you have a backflash, and then you come back to what Yah is doing with Moses. So Moses is still up on the mountain, but I want to read these verses, okay? Now, when the people saw that Moses was delayed from coming down from the mountain, remember they saw fire up there? What would you think? If Moses was gone for 40 days, he was up in the mountain and there's fire up there, what would you think happened to Moses? What would you think? All right, he was delayed. And the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, come, make us gods, plural, gods, that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. They had just agreed to a covenant with Yahweh that they would not make any gods, and if they did, there was a death penalty. They already forgot. And Aaron said to them, this is the part I don't understand about Aaron, I really don't, but he said, break off your golden earrings and which are on the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. Well, where did that come from? That was when they plundered the Egyptians, right? So what? That's what the people did. They broke off all the golden earrings which were in their ears, and they brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool. He fashioned it with a tool, and he made a golden molded calf. And then they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Whoa. It's hard to understand this part. So when Aaron saw it, then it said he built an altar. That's also part of that's the moon goddess part of this, okay? And Aaron made a proclamation. Tomorrow is a feast to Yahuwah. That's what he's saying. And we all know that this was on day 99 of the if you continue the Omer count. And then it said they rose up early on the next day. They had burnt offerings and they brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That's what was going down at the camp while Moses was at the top of the mountain. Okay. In verse 7, we're going to go back to the top of the mountain with Yahweh and Moses. We're going back up. We're going to hear the rest of the story here of what's going on up there. And Yahweh said to Moses, go, get down. This is trip number 6. He's saying, I want you to get down from trip number 6. Go get down. Now look what Yahweh says. For your people who you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it. And they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Did you hear what Yahweh said to Moses? Your people? That's what he said. Okay? And Yahweh said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed they are a stiff-necked people. Now therefore leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hard against them, and I may consume them, and I'll make of you a great nation. I'm going to start all over with you, Moses. Verse 11, and Moses pleaded with Yahweh, his Elohim. And he's talking to Elohim to change his mind and to tell him who these people really are. He said, why does your wrath burn hot against your people? You see that? He's saying they're not mine, they're yours. I'm giving them back to you. Why does your wrath burn hard against your people who you brought out of the land of Egypt with your great power and your mighty hand? You know what? This gives me goosebumps. Would you be as brave as Moses to talk like that to the creator of the universe? This is your mediator. This is the mediator for these people. He had to be bold. He was letting Yahweh know that he understood who these people were, and they weren't his, they were Yahweh's people. And then Moses asks Yahweh a question. Why should the Egyptians speak and say, yes, that Elohim brought them out just to harm them and to kill them in the mountains and to consume them with the face of the earth? And then Moses says, Yahweh, turn from your fierce wrath and relent from the harm that you're going to do to this people, your people. Don't you remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel? your servants to whom you swore by your own self? And you said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land I have spoken of, I will give it to your descendants so that they can have it forever. Verse 14, everybody, look what happened. Tim, do you want to read verse 14 for us? This is incredible.
And Yahuwah relented from the evil that he said he would do to his people. He changed his, I don't know if he changed his mind, but he changed his program.
He knew he was going to plan B, right? He knew the end from the beginning. And he knew plan A wasn't going to work. So he had to have plan B so that he wouldn't have to destroy the people when they had just said that they would agree to that covenant and obey it, that they would not worship to other gods. They knew if they did, they'd be under a death penalty. He had every right to destroy them like that. Every right. And not to ask questions. He did not have to mediate with Moses. He had the right to destroy them, everybody. But because Moses pleaded and said, wait a second, let's give them another chance. Verse 15, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony that were in his hand, and the tablets were written on both sides. On one side and on the other they were written. Those 2 tablets had all those words from Exodus 20 to the end of 23, about 3,000 words on those tablets, okay? Now the tablets were the work of Yahweh, and the writing was the writing of Yahweh engraved on the tablets. So he's on his way down. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people, okay, this is how you're going to know that Joshua waited for Moses 40 days and 40 nights. We all say that Moses was fasting 40 days and 40 nights, but what about Joshua? Listen. And Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, and he said to Moses, there's a noise of war in the camp. What's going on down there? And Moses said, because Yahweh told him what was going on. He said, it's not the voice of those who shout in victory, and nor is it the voice of those who cry in defeat, but it's the voice of those that sing that I hear. I hear them singing. So Joshua wasn't down there. He didn't know. He was waiting for Moses. He was waiting there. Everyone, that's incredible. Moses was waiting. Joshua was waiting for Moses. He did what he was told, okay? So as soon as he came near the camp, verse 19, and he saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands, and he broke them at the foot of the mountain. Brenda from Virginia, why did he break those tablets? What in the world was Moses doing? He just got the tablets. Brenda, why did he do that?
He broke the tablets because Israel had broken the covenant.
Did he have a right to break those tablets?
I don't think so, but he did.
He did. He was so disappointed, right? It says that he was angry. He was angry. Thank you, Brenda. Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hand at the foot of the mountain. They were broken. I would say that was a righteous anger. You know what, everyone? Moses, he went through so much with those people, you know, delivering them from all the plagues, everything that he did in conjunction with Yahuwah's commands all the way through. This is the 11th campsite, everybody. We already know what they did with campsites 1 to 10. Okay, this is number 11. And you know what? When people say he was the most humble, the most meek man on the earth, I absolutely believe that 1,000%. Because He must have had an endless supply of patience, but not here. He got upset. You know, like, how could you guys do this after everything that your Elohim has done for you? But we need to read a little bit more. We will get through the 10 trips, but I have to set a foundation here. So what did he do? He took the calf, which they had made, he burned it in the fire, he ground it to powder, and he scattered it on the water, and he made the children of Israel drink it. Now, I don't know how long that would have taken. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you've brought this great big sin upon them? Now, remember, this is little brother talking to big brother, to big brother, who is actually going to be the priest, okay? And Aaron says, wait a second, don't let your anger become hot. You know the people, you know that they're set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods, plural, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. We have no idea what happened to him. And I said to them, whoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I cast it in the fire, and this calf came out. I think that was a little bit of a lie. Do you think Moses believed that? When Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, and when I looked that up, it is naked. For Aaron had not restrained them, to their shame among their enemies. Then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp, and he said, whoever is on Yah's side, let him come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him, the sons of Levi. And he said to them, thus says Yahweh of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side and go in and out from the entrance to entrance throughout the camp, and let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. So there was a death penalty for some. Then Moses said, consecrate yourselves today. All right? Consecrate yourselves today to Yahweh, that he may bestow on you a blessing this day, for every man has opposed his son and his brother. Death penalty there was for some. Verse 30, we're starting a new day. And it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. So now, this is what he says. So now I'm going to go up to Yahweh and see if I can make atonement for you guys for this big sin. I guess that's what I have to do next. I'm going to go and see if perhaps I can make an atonement for your sin. Verse 31, this is trip number 7. Trip number 7. Then Moses returned to Yahweh. He went back up the mountain. Remember, he said, I'm going to go up. You just have to read it. I'm going to go up. So he went up, and he said to Yahweh, oh, these people have sinned a great sin, and they've made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, Yahuwah, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of the book. Take me out, which you have written. And Yah said to Moses, no, it's not going to work like that. Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of the book. Now therefore, Yah says, go lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you, and my angel's going to go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sin. And so the Lord plagued the people because of what they did with the calf that Aaron made. So there was a little bit of a punishment, but it wasn't a death penalty. Moses is still there up the mountain on trip number 7. And it says he's giving him instructions that they're going to be leaving Sinai, And basically he's telling them, I want you to go into the land of Canaan. But we find out in the rest of the stories, and I won't be doing that today, that when the spies went in to spy out the land, remember, out of the 12 that came back, 10 were murmuring and saying, there's giants in the land. There's no way we can take them. And so instead of going into the land like they were supposed to do at this point in time, they got delayed another 40 years in the wilderness. But there in verse 3, Yah says, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. Second time he's saying that. And when the people heard these grave tidings, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. They didn't dare. And then it says in verse 5, for Yahweh said to Moses, say to the children of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. I could come into your midst in one moment and consume all of you. Now therefore take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you. So Moses came down, trip number 7, he comes down and he tells the people, and they stripped off all their ornaments. They were not going to chance disobeying that one. But you know what? The next trip is kind of neat, number 8. I think Moses was so disappointed of what happened with these people. I just think he just didn't know what to do next. I probably was tired and worn out. He had made a couple of trips up and down this mountain in just a few days, okay? And he's 80, right? He's 80. But anyway, number 8, this is the next thing that happens. Moses took his tent and he pitched it outside the camp. Pardon me, I got ahead of myself. This is number 8. Number 9 is the one I want you to pay attention to. But he takes the tent and he pitches it outside the camp. And he says in verse 7, it came to pass that everyone who sought Yahweh went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which was outside the camp. And so whenever Moses went out to the tabernacle, the people rose and they stood by their tent door. And they watched Moses until he went into the tabernacle. And it came to pass when Moses entered the tabernacle. Now, this is just the tent. This is not the sanctuary. Okay, that hasn't been built yet. This is just his tabernacle. When he went into the tabernacle, that the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and Yahweh talked with Moses. Okay. And all the people saw the pillar of the cloud standing at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose and worshiped, every man at their tent door. So Yahweh spoke to Moses. What does it say? Face to face. Yahweh spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. And he would return back into the camp. But look what's happening with Joshua. His servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tabernacle. He stayed right there. Moses came and went, but Joshua stayed there. All right, now we're going to go into trip number 9. This one is really special to me. This is where I see Moses thinking about what's been going on, and I think he just feels like he's been so deserted by the whole camp, even his own brother, that he just needs to have some special alone time with Yahweh. He just says, I just need to be with you. I just need to get some strength. I just need to see you. I really, really do. And although it doesn't say that he went up into the mountain, I believe that you're going to see that he did go up into the mountain, because Yah's going to hide him in the cleft of the rock. And I want to read it to you. Verse 12, then Moses said to Yahweh, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray, Moses says, if I have found grace in your sight, show me now your way, that I may know you, and that I may find grace in your sight, and consider that this nation is your people. And Yahweh said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And then Moses said to Yahweh, if your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. Like, there's no point. For how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except for that you go with us? So we shall be separate, your people and I, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. Then Yahweh said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. And then Moses gets really brave. Look what he says in verse 18. Moses said, please show me your glory. I just want to see your glory. And Yahweh said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of Elohim before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. But Yahweh said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. And Yahweh said, here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be, while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand while I pass by. And then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face you shall not see. Everyone, I'm convinced this was up in the mountain. This was not at the bottom of the mountain. I'm convinced Moses went up to the top of the mountain. He needed to be all alone with his Elohim. He just needed to have alone time, and he got so brave that he said, I want to see your glory. Guess what? Yahuwah said, yeah, you can. Just my back, not my face, just my back. And I think that Moses needed to have that little bit of encouragement, maybe some one-on-one counseling, because he still had a long ways to go with this stiff-necked people. Okay, chapter 34. And Yahweh said to Moses, he's down from the mountain. He says, I want you to cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and I will write on the tablets again, the ones that you broke. I'm going to put the same words on them. And then, you know, I've heard a sermon on this where the speaker said, I just wonder how long it took for Moses to cut those tablets, to get down on the ground and to chisel it out, you know, chisel out those 2 pieces of stone. But guess what? They didn't read verse 2 because it says, so be ready in the morning and come up in the morning. Everybody, I think that was the next morning. I don't think that was mornings about 7 weeks away. Be ready in the morning to come up to Mount Sinai and present yourself to me there at where? The top of the mountain. You just have to read it. It's not hard. This is trip number 9. This is what he's saying. I want you to do this. But he's also saying in verse 3, and no man is going to come with you. Nobody, just you. Verse number 4. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and then Moses rose early in the morning and he went up Mount Sinai. This is trip number 9, up Mount Sinai, just like he was commanded. And he took the 2 tablets of stone. Away he went. So he chiseled those things out pretty quick. And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaims. He passes before him and he says, Elohim Almighty, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. So Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth, verse 8, and worshiped Elohim. And then Moses said, then Elohim said, Moses, pardon me, if I have found grace in your sight, I pray, go among us, even though we are a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin. 3rd time that's coming up, stiff-necked people, 3rd at least, isn't it? So here we go in verse 10. And Yah said, behold, I make a covenant. Before all your people, I will do marvels such as have not been done in all the earth, nor any nation, and all the people among you who are all seen, have all seen the work of me, for, excuse me, for this is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. And he says, I'm going to drive out your enemies. Now, in verses 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, all those verses, Yah is reminding them, you are not to worship another God. Don't be making another golden calf. Don't do it. We already figured out what happened the first time. So he's telling them first, don't do this with other gods. And then in verses 18 and onwards, he's reminding Moses about the worship statutes. He's talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and verse 21, the Sabbath commandment, the weekly Sabbath commandment, 6 days you shall do all your work. Remember what I said? He always leaves the best for the last. He's reminding them about the worship statutes. There in verse 22, he's talking about the Feast of Weeks. That's what we're doing right now, and the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year. And then in verse 23, another reminder, 3 times in a year, all the men are to appear before me to worship. Verse 27, we're just going to skip down to verse 27. Then Yahweh said to Moses, write these words, for according to the tenor of these words, I have made a covenant with you and Israel. And guess what? Moses was up there for another 40 days. That's what it says in verse 28. He was with Yahweh 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water. And Yahweh wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments, or would have been all of those words. Now Joshua was probably back at the tent of the tabernacle. He didn't go with him this time. Verse 29, look what happens. Now it was so, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone while he had been talking to Yahweh. This time, people were obedient. They saw the fire at the top, but they knew that Moses was okay. And when he came down, he called them in verse 31. He called them and he talked to them. And afterwards, all the children of Israel came near, and he gave them the commandments that Yah had spoken with him on the mountain. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before Yahweh to speak with him, he would take the veil off until he came out. And then he would come out and speak to the children. And whenever he came out, he had to put the veil on his face. But not when he talked to Yahweh. That was face to face. There was no veil there. I just thought that was so neat. And in chapter 35, there is some Sabbath regulations. Again, he's telling them in verse 2, work shall be done for 6 days, but on the 7th day shall be a holy day for you, a Sabbath of rest to Yahweh. And look at this part, whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. Don't remember reading that in the first covenant. And then he says, you shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations on the Sabbath day. Basically, that's your trips. I think we're basically at the end of that, because after that, what happens is that Moses tells all the people the instructions of how they're supposed to set up this Aaronic priesthood, build the sanctuary. So the next part of the book of Exodus is all about how this is all getting done. You can go all the way through these chapters, and it tells you in chapter 40, verse number 2, it says, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. This is in the 2nd year, not the 1st year, of course. So Tim, do you have some insight about what day of the week that was of the first day of the first month in that 2nd year when they set up the tabernacle?
Yes, when you follow through on the covenant calendar is so incredibly accurate that you can determine beyond any shadow of a doubt that the first day when they set up the tabernacle was the 7th day Sabbath. And believe me, when I saw that, I had a difficult time with that, because I have always been taught that we are not to do work on the seventh day Sabbath. So I had a very difficult time with that. And I started to realize that there's things that we need to learn and traditions that we need to drop about what we can and what we can't do on the seventh day Sabbath. When it comes to the work of Yahuwah, whatever work it is, if it's the work of his command and his will, then we are to do it and not question it. It is his will when we do good.
That's right. I had a hard time with that too, Tim, because of the way I was raised. But we did come to understand that when Yahweh commanded something, whether it was a feast Sabbath or a weekly Sabbath, that he had a reason for it. For instance, we understand that the showbread was baked on the Sabbath. It was baked on the Sabbath day and taken into the holy place of the tabernacle. And then the old showbread was taken out, and that's what the priests ate on for the next week. The showbread was in the tabernacle for a whole week before it was partaken of, but that was baked on the Sabbath day. We would think that was work. We wouldn't do that, but this is a holy consumption, and it was not touched for a whole week. So there's a couple of instances where you'll find those kinds of things. But basically, those 10 trips of Moses around that mountain basically show you that the book of the law were those extra instructions because of the disobedience and breaking the covenant. The book of the law, when you do the full study, was placed outside of the Ark of the Covenant when the Ark was finally built and the sanctuary was raised up. And of course, it's just logical that the blood ratified book of the covenant and the tablets of stone would have been placed inside the Ark of the Covenant underneath the mercy seat. So it is the book of the law that is on the outside. Now, here's my question that maybe some of you are thinking about. Did that book of the law also contain the instructions of the book of the covenant? Did it have both sets of instructions? Because the reason I'm asking that is that the kings, when the kings came to rule, or even the leaders, I believe the leaders too, but for sure the kings, and that's going to be 500 years down the way, the kings were required to write out the Torah, and they were to govern by it. But do they really have easy access to the book of the covenant inside the Ark of the Covenant? There is a book of the law on the outside, and I believe that there would have been many copies made, and that the kings would have used the book of the law to make their own personal copies with. But that's not just the Aaronic priesthood, and that's not just the sanctuary. That has to include the book of the covenant laws that we read about in Exodus 20 to the end of 23, because that is the actual covenant. The book of the law instructions is just another priesthood, because there is no more Melchizedek priest. The people basically rejected. Basically what Yahweh is saying, that Moses, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. They're rejecting my plan to have a priest that will intercede for them in 2 different ways. Moses was a leader, and he was the priest. He was a leader, and he was the priest. When the people broke the covenant, now the Melchizedek priesthood responsibilities have to get divided up into 2 different departments. It's going to be 2 instead of under 1 hat. So Joshua goes on and takes up the leadership of Moses. Moses is basically acting as the leader until he dies, and then Joshua picks up the leadership. But the Aaronic priesthood picks up the priestly duties. So now, instead of it being under one very perfect, what would you say, perfect plan A, it's now into plan B with 2. So what happens after this is that Joshua picks up the leadership, and the priests do the priesthood in the sanctuary. These are to be separate. They are not to be, they are separate responsibilities. There's about 15 leaders. They're called judges. from the time that Moses died up until the time that the people clamored for a king. And that's around 500 years. And, you know, we have Samson and Gideon and Samuel, Deborah, you know, judges. There's about 15 of them. At the same time, the priesthood is doing their thing. They're being the priesthood for the people with the sacrifices and, you know, the worship statutes and all that kind of stuff. I just want to break this out for you just a tiny bit more, because when they get to the kings, then it's not the judges that are leading the people. Now it's the kings that are leading the people. And you all know that story in the Old Testament. King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and then the kingdoms were split. And then we have kings in the north and kings in the south, okay? There was a lot of kings. From about 1000 BC until 300 years later is when Assyria scattered the northern tribes. And remember that Judah got the same warnings as Israel did. And it was about 100 years later, in 600 BC, that Judah got tromped back to Babylon. Okay, so their kings didn't really do them very much good. They just went into so much apostasy. But now, this is what I want you to see. When Judah came back from Babylon, did they ask for another king? Did they ask for a king? Was there another king after they came back from exile? 400 years BC, or basically 538 in that area, okay? No, there was no more king. They said that they would have Yahuwah as their king, but did they? This is what I saw happen, is that the priesthood that is supposed to be only the priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood, basically picks up the leadership. And the Aaronic priesthood basically takes the leadership and puts it into the priesthood. And everyone, that's where it became extremely corrupt. And you go read Malachi chapter 2, and we've done all that study in the Moon series. That priesthood became so corrupt. It was always supposed to be separate. It's like separate the church and the state. It's kind of like that. They were to have Yahuwah as their king, lead them as their leader. And it was the priesthood from the Aaronic line that was to be the priesthood. Of course, the whole tribe of Levi was supposed to be keepers of the sanctuary and, you know, water carriers and wood gatherers and cleaning up the sacrifice and stuff like that. But that's where trouble started, is when the Aaronic priesthood decided to take on the leadership. And you know what happened by the time that Yahushua comes on the scene. Those poor people in all of the land of Israel there, especially Judah, were under such bondage from these people that said that they were the leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the priests. They were under such bondage. It went right back to the way it was when they were in Egypt almost. So I saw a problem in the Old Testament, and if you read the Old Testament, you'll see it too, where the Aaronic priesthood took up leadership that did not belong to them, and they imposed it on the people. And that was never Yahweh's plan. That was never his plan. They are the ones that did that. So by the time that Yahushua comes on the scene, and of course John the Baptist is the legitimate Melchizedek priest. He's just not in the sanctuary because it's so corrupt. But that is why Yahushua had to come back, and he had to pick up these two job descriptions, and he had to get it back to plan A. So plan B was supposed to be like a wooden leg or a crutch to get them through so that they could get back to the Melchizedek priesthood. So do you see how what the Aaronic priesthood did is they just corrupted it so bad? The people didn't know which end was up. They really didn't. They were so deceived, and they were just being taken down the wrong path. That's why it was so important for Yahushua to be anointed and to be able to step into that role. And that's another part of the story there, not part of the study. But when you go back to the old story of Moses and these 10 trips, Moses acting as that priest, that intercessory mediator that mediator for us. That's what Yahushua is doing for us on a large scale. So I don't know, if you mark your Bibles, you might be able to see all those fun things. And when you teach it right out of the book of Exodus to people, teach that everlasting covenant, that we're no longer under that book of the law stuff. That Aaronic priesthood, that's gone. That was so corrupt. And that sanctuary, y'all put up with them for 40 years to try to figure out that they weren't supposed to be doing that. But they would not listen until finally he had to destroy it, to get rid of it. And what are they ready to do? That priesthood, they're ready to raise it up, just as rebellious as they ever were before. So that's my story. Or that's Moses' story. That's all I have.
Thank you very, very much, Charlene. That is the best I've seen you present, bar none. That is absolutely fabulous. I'm blown away. Thank you. What a blessing on Shavuot. It's absolutely incredible. And I want to ask you, I see some hands up and I'm going to get to them, but I want to ask a question. You were just talking about the priesthood that were undertaking their leadership, of which it should not have been. And I'm asking today, is there that same false leadership, the Sanhedrin, that wants to bring out the Noahide laws? Is that this exact same pattern happening today? Does the evil adversary change his ways? No, he can't. It's another pattern that is being repeated again today, same as before. That's why it's so important to go back and look at this thing. Isaiah told us 7 times, if we want to know the ending, we must know the beginning. So Charlene, I want to thank you very, very, very much for putting things so clear. It's incredible. Now let's get to the hands.
While you're getting to the hands, Tim, it's just very interesting that those Noahide laws do not have any worship statutes in them. And you know, the book of the covenant, remember what I said to you? Yahuwah always emphasized the worship statutes. It was at the end, and he always reminded them, don't run after false gods. Those are the 2 things that you're going to pick up on this. You know, there's lots of good covenant commands and instructions, but it was always focused on those other gods, don't do it, and remember my worship statutes. That is why the calendar is so important. The calendar study is so important. And one more thing, when I teach calendar, when I help people with calendar, new people that want to understand calendar, I start here. I start here with the trips. I don't do all 10 of them, but I get to you know, the first 6 trips. I do those pretty good. But that's how you teach calendar, is with these Moses trips. So you might want to learn, and everybody loves it. They just, because they see the whole picture. They see the whole picture. They see that calendar is not standing on its own. It is one of the strongest cords in the 3 strand. So if you can remember that and learn to teach it, you'll have lots of fun with people that are learning calendar.
Yes, and when you study the Melchizedek priesthood and calendar, the little tentacles of wisdom and bunny trails that you can trace, they just go out everywhere. It's absolutely incredible. Sharon, you've had your hand up for a while. Would you like to speak to us?
Well, when she asked the first question at the beginning, where she was saying, Charlene, the book of the covenant, I believe he divided them to show there's a difference. And if the book of the covenant cannot have an added or taken away, then that part of the law that was imposed, it couldn't be together. So it had to be separated, because it would look like the same thing. It would like to us, it would look like the same thing if we didn't realize it was supposed to be divided. It was not supposed to be together. So yeah, I don't see them bringing them together. And also the same thing with the different priests. You have the Levitical priest and Melchizedek. You had to have that division to be able to understand it. And the covenant covers that, and the Levi covers the law, the one outside the ark. In verse, I don't know, I forgot what chapter it was, but it was when Mosheh was, when Yah came and he put his voice out there. He wanted to put his voice out to the people to hear it. I believe that was like a double witness, so that there was no denying what was true from Moses' mouth. So Yah wanted his word and the word of Mosheh that was understood by man to be the same. And then it was somewhere about the second death, or the death penalty or sentence. It parallels the same thing that will happen in the end times in chapter 20 of Revelation, that the saints will judge as priest. The same thing, that they're showing that these people that were taken out are the same thing that's going to happen in the chapter 20 in judgment, that we as priests, as saints, will judge this in righteousness. And then they were talking about well, I'll go past that. I was noticing the trips when you're going down the thing, the trips, the numbers have meanings to even have meanings to, like 8 is like a new let me see, 8 was like a new beginning, and 9 was judge. They all had the same showing you that the number actually was telling you what those trips were. It was really interesting. And then Mosheh's face shone, and because Yah can't look, we can't look on Yah's face or we die. That told me that he had to be completely with the Ruach in him, and that his soul was no longer, his flesh was no longer there. Because if it was, then he wouldn't be alive. So to me, that was a blessing that he received, that the Ruach was with him the whole time as his face shone. And that's why even today, darkness does not like the light. When that light is there in us, they run. Anyway, that's all I Thank you.
Good observations. Very good.
Okay, we have another hand up. And I hope I'm saying this right. Ellie? I think that's how you say it. Ellie, are you with us?
Or Eli? I don't know. We don't know.
Ellie,
Yeah,
trying to unmute.
There we are.
You asked the question, Charlene, about the book of the law. And back in like 2014, 2015, I started really getting into that. And I looked up every reference to the book of the law. You said the book of the covenant, the book of the law. Was the book of the covenant included in the book of the law? And I don't think we ever came to any conclusion on that, or I missed it if we did. And I went through all of these passages, and I found that every text referring to the covenant, the book of the covenant, the book of the law, the book of Moses, the book of Moses, any rate, all these different names, and I'll have to get the chart out. It was referring to places in Deuteronomy. It was referring to places in Leviticus. It was referring to places after the book of the covenant was done. And so I thought that was very, very interesting, and that might answer your question.
Yeah, I don't know all the ins and outs of the whole priesthood study. I'm just sharing the 10 trips here. And I've never had time to go back and study it since 2015. We've just been too busy on calendar, but it really is a good piece of homework, an assignment for anybody to do a little research. If I remember correctly, I think Book of the Law is named 11 times in the scriptures between the Old and the New Testament. I think Book of the Covenant is only named 4 times. So I'm just putting that out there, as I feel that those words would have been included in the Book of the Law. And the reason that I say that is that those Book of the Covenant words are everlasting. So if the Book of the Law is done away with, The Book of the Covenant words are still perpetual. They're still everlasting. The only difference is that when Yahusha dies, it's better blood that anoints those words. It's the better blood. It's not the blood of animals or any other sacrifices. But basically, the words didn't change. It's better blood. I just like to liken it to a will. My mother, was very ill, and she felt she needed to change something in the will. I had talked to her about it. Executor. She had my brother and I listed as executors in the will. And I said, Mom, we need to have just one person, either take me out or take my brother out or put somebody different in there. But 2 executors maybe is not a good idea. So just 9 or 10 days before Mom died, we had the lawyer come in and do a codicil, is that what it's called? Make this change that there's only one executor. It was at that point initialed and dated as a brand new will, but nothing in the will was changed. None of the requests or whatever they wanted, just that the executor position was changed. So I see it that way. When Yahusha died, none of the covenant words were changed, because the Aaronic priesthood and the sanctuary in the Book of the Law are now done away with. They're not needed anymore. But it was dated. It's updated. It's updated, to that Passover day. This is the day that we're updating it with my blood. The words are still still have not changed, because he can't change, and he doesn't, because he doesn't lie. He's the same today, tomorrow, and forever. So whether the Book of the Covenant words were inside the Book of the Law, to me, it doesn't matter. It's like those words are written on stone. If the rest are written on paper, and if you throw them into the fire, guess what? The paper burns away, but the stone doesn't. The stone is eternal. So I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but it's just something to think about.
There's another aspect of stones referred to in the New Testament. I don't remember exactly where. And I was discussing this with a pastor several years ago. And he figured out that it was the Book of the Law, stones, blessings and curses at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal that they did every 7 years, which I did not see how that fit. But in case anybody doesn't know the scriptures really well and doesn't recognize that they whitewashed some stones and they put all of that to be read with all of the Book of the Law covenant aspect to be written on that, it'd be something worth investigating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to investigate, no doubt. Probably reveal a lot of good information. Thank you, Ellie. We appreciate that. Walter, I see your hand up, but I'm going to get to you, but we have a hand up first. You'll be next, Walter. Maxie, you have your hand up?
Yes, I had a question.
Maxie, you're breaking up really badly, and we can't even come close to understanding.
Was the 10th time? Okay.
That's better.
Okay. What verse and what chapter was the 10th trip?
Oh, okay. The 10th trip, and I do have a little study on this. Encounter 10, we're at Exodus 34, verse 4. That's where it is.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
Charlene,
So
you
in
may have
verse-
made an error with that, because I had written down, you had said number 9, and I wrote it down there, but I realized that we already had a number 9, verse 30 of chapter 32. So it's possible, maybe, has anybody else noticed that maybe we had a duplicate of number 9 and we needed number 10 in chapter 34?
Yeah, I bet you I did
Verse
say
2 and
that.
4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So number 9 is at chapter 33:12, and I think that's where Moses went up and asked to see Yah's glory. because he puts him in the cleft of the rock. So I may have made a mistake there. So 33 verse 12 is trip number 9. And then trip number 10, Exodus 34, there at the beginning.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Went up in the morning.
So where is trip number 8?
And number 8 is going to be chapter 33, verses 7 to 11.
I don't know.
And actually, it's not a trip. It's an encounter at the bottom of the mountain where he moves the tent of the tabernacle outside of the camp. So that's why I'm calling it 10 encounters, because the burning bush, I believe, was at the bottom of the mountain, and this was something that happened there. That is something significant, okay, because of the sin. So it wasn't really a trip into the mountain, but something significant. So number 8.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. It takes a while to mark your Bible. Yes,
Okay,
Tim.
Walter. Walter, go ahead.
That was a question that I had, because you did say that trip number 9 was chapter 34, verse 2 or 3 and 4. So I was
Oh, yeah.
So that actually clears it up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right, but it shows you that people are listening.
Yes, good. And some of our best teachers are listening.
Yes.
Well, guess what, everybody? You won't make the same mistake when you do it. When you teach it, you'll remember Charlene made that mistake, and you guys won't do it. So.
Well, I think you must have done a fabulous job, Charlene, because we don't have any questions. Nobody. It's quiet.
Well, Matthew, or today at T4's Pentecost, I'm supposed to do a 15-minute something or other for what happened at Mount Sinai. And then there's going to be 2 other parts to it from other people. So I get 15 minutes to do this again. But I probably will just go up to Exodus 24:11 if I can get it done, and I don't know, because I think we almost spent an hour on that. But my question to everybody here is, and I see that Danon's got his hand up, but first of all, my question to everybody here is, do you see why Exodus 19 is such an important chapter to understanding the whole picture? If you skip chapter 19, you are going to be lost. That is really important. There's some principles in there, especially that Yahweh speaks to Moses face to face, and the people heard what they were talking about when he was up there. And when he came down and Moses gave the words, they knew they were the exact same words. That is such an important principle. So that is found in chapter 19, verses 8 and 9. So when I do this, I always spend a lot of time on chapter 19. There's a lot of calendar language in there as well. So I didn't tell you the rest of the story, though, did I? So when I discovered all of the calendar language in chapter 19, and we already had worked out the Passover and the 3 days and the crossing of the Red Sea and the quail and the manna in month 2, we had that all worked out with 30 days per month, and everything was perfect. Then I thought, well, I scratched out a calendar very quickly from Pentecost, and I worked it back. I thought, okay, it has to count back 50 days to what we had found as first fruits, years before, right? And it worked. It was exactly 50 days. I was just sure I made a mistake. So I worked it both ways a couple of times. Dana and I were doing it together. And it was like, oh my goodness, it works. The big surprise was, everybody, we know exactly the date of Pentecost right there in Exodus 20. We know the exact date. It was the 8th day of the 3rd month, because the 4th day was Omer number 46. That was tingly for me. So, and then of course with the Joshua study, it all gets cemented in just beautifully. But we can know the date, and it was Shavuot, and it was on the 50th day of the Omer count. It did not go to day 99. Like some are saying, you count 49 and then you add another 50. It doesn't go that far.
And it's interesting you say that, Charlene, because when you read the scripture, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but Yahuwah said to Mosheh that his people went out of the way the words "the way" are so important. He is telling Moshe, your people are not on my calendar. He's telling them their feast is not on my feast. It is so clear. It's just they went out of the way, Yahuwah's calendar. Damon, you got your hand up.
I do. I thought Walter was next.
Go ahead, Damon. Walter already spoke his piece.
Okay, cool. You know, I'm just looking at all these similarities, and I've been through this study so many times, and every time I see something different. I would really like to know the precise date of when this happened, because I'd really like to go back to Starry Night Pro and Starlarium to see what was going on in the sky. And I'll bet you it was the same picture that we got today up in the heavens. Israel was getting cut off. Judgment was happening in the camp when Moses went down there, unfortunately. And then he had to separate himself from the tribe. What the heck was going on? They were worshiping the moon, and I'll bet Enoch was somewhere around. He wasn't invented yet until after Yahusha had died, and the first printing of the book Enoch came out. What a joke. And then we've got other Babylonian teachings I'm sure they were involved with. You know, what a shadow picture. And, you know, one day is 1,000 years to Yahuwah. Excuse me, one day to Yahuwah is 1,000 years to us. So if you take that mathematical equation, and you know Moses was in the presence of Yahuwah, he was on his time clock. The people down below were on their time clock. Moses and Joshua were kind of like Abraham. They were in a trance. When Yahushua went in and walked amongst those body parts on Passover, Abraham was in a trance. I bet he could not regulate how much time went by. Moses was in the mount for 40 days and 40 nights. I'll bet you it was 40 minutes in Yahweh's time clock. It wasn't 40 days to them. It went by so quick. It went by so quick. So we got these shadow pictures. You know, the Father's really going to take us on angel's wings in the last days. He really is. I hope that made sense. My mind goes out there sometimes like a science fiction movie, and I can't help it. This is what Yahweh puts on my plate, and I get to investigate it. Then I get to report to you guys. It's not an easy job.
That's a good point to where Moshe was on Yahuwah's time. And, you know, it could be right. Maybe it might have been 40 minutes on Yahuwah's time. It could have been. Maybe that's why it didn't bother him to go without food and water for 40 minutes or however it was. That's an interesting point. Thank you, Danon. Desiree, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking about something when Charlene was going through the chapters. When Joshua stayed in the middle of on the middle of the mountain when Moses went all the way up for those 40 days and 40 nights. And correct me if I'm wrong here, this is where my brain was going. Is Joshua a shadow picture of Yahusha? And what is the significance of the 40 days and 40 nights? So I was thinking of when he was tempted in the wilderness by Satan. That was 40 days and 40 nights. So I was just thinking, what was it that Joshua did for 40 days and 40 nights? Was he in a spiritual battle? Or I don't know. Like, I just was wondering if there was a shadow picture to that. Just a question.
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. And maybe he was interceding, you know, between Moses and the people. I don't know. But yes, I think there was a type there. And we often forget about Joshua. You know, the focus is always just on Moses, but Joshua was really a mighty, mighty man. And, you know, after Moses died, he carried on in that leadership, and he tried to clean out the camp of all these pagan nations. And he really did. He battled for 20 years. He had a very, very busy, probably exhausting career of being the general to battle, but he fought it to the end. The sad part is that at the end of Joshua 24, it's verse 15, you all know the verse. It says, as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. But read the beginning of the verse. That's where you really find out what he was talking about. He said, are you going to serve the gods of the Amorites or the gods of your fathers? And the gods of their fathers were the moon worshiping gods from Terah and from Laban, the gods that Rachel stole and was hiding on them. When Laban came along to find where his gods were, he wasn't interested in, and not that he didn't get to say goodbye to all his family and his grandchildren. He just wanted to know where his gods were. So Joshua made an appeal. Are you going to serve the gods of your fathers or the Amorites, or are you going to serve the right one? And you only have to read into the first couple verses of Judges chapter 2. And that's about 2 years after Joshua died. And the people are already worshiping the Baals and the Ashtoreth. Baal was the sun god and the Ashtoreths were the moon goddesses. So it didn't take very long. So remember when Yahweh said to Moses, you tell the people, I do not want them worshiping other gods because this is going to be a snare unto you forever. And it's exactly what happened. Moses, before he died, he reminded the people there in Deuteronomy again, don't go and do this. But he says, I'm already going to tell you that's exactly what you're going to do. And that's what happened. And that's the sad history of the whole Old Testament. So Joshua was a really great guy.
Yeah. I also really appreciated the part towards the end there when you were talking about how it was Moses was a leader and the priest, and then it was separated. And I guess I kind of knew that, but I had never pieced it together that way. So I just really, really liked that part, and that how it came back together. And that's why Yeshua came at that time, was just to get that corrected. And that's where the corruption came in. And so anyway, that I really appreciated you adding that part to it, because that really clarified some things in my mind. So I like that part.
And the 75, I'm trying to finish up, the Melchizedek priesthood that Tim started way back at Sukkot, but there's a little bit more to finish to it. But that number 75 is really important. And there were 75 that went up the mountain for that covenant confirming meal. But guess what? When you work the genealogy back from Yahusha in the book of Luke, it's 42 generations back to King David. 42 is a very interesting number. And then there's another 33 generations. Well, when you add 42 and 33, what do you get? 75. There's something going on with the 75, and I'm trying to find time to finish that. But when you start looking at these numbers, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening around this priesthood, that started way back there with the covenant, that covenant confirming meal right there at Mount Sinai. So we're trying to break that open as well. So just keep your eyes and ears open. There's all kinds of goodies.
And the idea that the lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. So we see it as like a plan A and a plan B, but really it was plan A all along. You know what I mean? He knew what was going to happen. And what you're saying there about the 75 just confirms that. You know what I mean? Like it was planned all along. It's weird to think he understands our sin even before we commit it, but he does, because he knows us before we're even born. So that's hard for us to wrap around our human minds, but it's really interesting. Yeah, it is.
Thank you, Desiree. Appreciate your comments and your input. We like the interaction. Maxie, you have your hand up.
Yes, I was going to respond to Desiree's comment on what was he doing 40 days on the mountain with fasting. Having fasted 40 days, fasting is on the mountain. But as you read, Yeshua, after 40 days, was tempted. And the same is true here. After 40 days, Moses and Joshua go down and find the children of Israel. So there's always a valley after the fasting.
Mhm. Hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Maxie. Appreciate that too. I always like these comments. It's great. Linda Thompson, you have your hand up. Would you like to speak to us?
Yeah, I just, Charlene, thank you for that. What a wonderful teaching. And I just wanted to talk for just a second about the whole golden calf incident. Years ago, I heard John Bevere speak about that. And I have always struggled too with knowing what was going on, especially with Aaron, how he could be drawn into that. And one of the things John Bevere said that struck me about it was he said that when Aaron said, I cast those things into the fire and this is what came out, he wasn't exactly telling the truth, obviously, because he fashioned it with a tool. But John Bevere was saying that in a deeper sense, what came out of that fire was what was coming out of Aaron and out of the children, because they still had Egypt in them. And so what came out of that fire was what was coming out of them, in that they were still steeped in idolatry, and they hadn't understood that even the covenant that they had just made with the Father was a covenant that, needed to be regarded to the exclusion of all others. And so they went back to what they knew, and what they knew was idolatry. And finding that, I just thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. It is so easy to fall back into old habits. It's too easy, and I know that by experience. So I can understand why they did it. Not saying that it's correct, but I understand it. Danon, you got your hand up.
I do. It's up again, and I'm just chomping at the bit, and I just want to wait my turn. When I stepped into the light of the Book of the Law and the Book of the Covenant through the writings of David Perry that Matthew Nolan took and pretty much presented to us in a very beautiful format, I got to learn all those naughty verses in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, that I just didn't understand. And these Pentecostal pastors were just plowing through me with their doctrines because I didn't understand it. For years, they would sit me down in these supernatural discussions on the book of Galatians and the book of Romans, and it was like, wow, I'm not even close to understanding what you're trying to share with me. So when I discovered the Book of the Law and the Book of the Covenant were not synonymous, my mind started really opening up to the 10 Commandments, and I could put the 10 Commandments on a board, and I could rightly divide the Book of the Law versus the Book of the Covenant. And lo and behold, a teacher had already written a book on all the statutes concerning the Book of the Law and the Book of the Covenant, and what was it like then, and what's going on today. So I pulled this book down off my shelf, and I started really going through it. And I got to tell you, the Heavenly Father has blessed people that are not in our camp, that are still in other churches today. We need to pray for them. Between the porch and the altar, we got a big harvest coming in. But we got a lot of brothers and sisters that are still on Sunset. They're still on Enoch. They're doing Babylonian language that doesn't make sense, and it's just not correct. We're the camp that corrects it. Thanks.
Thank you, Danon. Yes, we appreciate your passion on these matters, Danon. We really do. Leanne Johnson, you have your hand up. Would you like to speak with us, Leanne?
Yes. The real nice lady that talked about the numerology matching very closely with the trips up the mountain, that was really interesting. And so I got to looking at the 75 people that were on the mountain. 7 plus 5 is 13. And isn't that a number of transformation? So 1 plus 3 is 40. So there's your 40 days and 40 nights. So wouldn't that be about transformation more so? I'm asking. I would love to hear from her again. I don't know her name.
Sharon, wasn't that Sharon?
Okay, 13 is depravity and rebellion. And then you said 1 + 3 is 40 is trial, probation, and testing. So,
Well, that to me would be from, I mean, I don't know what y'all are, what that's coming from. I don't. The way I learned it was different, that 13 was about transformation, which, you know, 1 and 3 is 40, which was also about transformation. So maybe I need to get your books to learn another system.
well, the book is really, a lot of it's just the Bible too. I picked these up because I realized that numbers mean a lot, and like 15 is faith. You know, there's these, just one word explains numbers. You know, 17's victory. There, you know, but 18's bondage. They're there, but you know, it's like once you start reading the numbers into the scripture, you start seeing a whole lot more.
Yes. Thank you.
And
You
thank
just said something really interesting, Sharon. Did you catch that, Charlene?
I did.
Number 17.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear about number 17 later on this evening. Very interesting.
Well, 17 was one of the years that I kept looking for, and I had that in my spirit all my life, and I thought, well, you know, what's happening? Well, it took forever, but yet Yah was showing me that's the beginning of the tribulation for us to be watching. And then you saw what the world did. If you go back and look what the world did, Trump was making the what is it, embassy in Israel. You know, so and they're doing all their false stuff, but Yah's doing all his stuff, and it's I'm sorry, it's just amazing to me. I can go on. I love it so much.
Well, it's a good reminder for me, and I just want to have a little bit of an announcement right now that later on today in the evening session of our Zoom, there's going to be an announcement for a Covenant Calendar Club, and I'm sure you want to be there. You all want to hear it. That's all I'm going to say today. But right now, I should say.
What time?
We'll be starting this afternoon at 4 o'clock Mountain Time, Mountain Daylight Time. 4 o'clock this afternoon. It'll be there's a fair bit of time between Matthew Nolan's Shavuot ceremony or Zoom, so we have lots of time to get refreshed and eat, and then we'll be back on with the Zoom tonight, and it's going to be interesting. Promise. Eric is going to be giving us a summary of the campsites that we have been going over for the past few weeks. So I'm looking forward to that. April, you have your hand up, sister. Where are you?
Yeah, I have a question. And this is kind of really kind of off the subject, but you know, when you talked about the Trinity when they were down with the golden calf, can you tell me the parts that make that a Trinity?
Mm-hmm. Yes. The calf itself, well, let's just start at the beginning. The calf, the horns, there was a sun disk between the horns. That sun disk would have been the sun god or representative of Nimrod.
Yeah.
The calf itself was the representative of Tammuz, the false messiah. And the altar that it stood on was the feminine portion, which represented the moon goddess. So between the altar and the sun disk, and then you have the actual calf as the false messiah. That was the false trinity. We have that in one of the moon studies.
Thank you.
The moon studies.
Okay.
Thank you, April. Sure happy to have you with us. Libby, let's hear from you.
I just think it's interesting to remember that Moses was raised in Egypt, you know, within Pharaoh's court. And so his life is broken up into 3 40s. He was raised in Pharaoh's court. He spent 40 years in Midian. And there he had to learn how to be a shepherd, because you know he didn't learn that in Egypt. And then he ended up wandering with everyone 40 years in the wilderness. Now, while Moses was in Midian, his big brother was still back in Egypt. So Aaron was still knee deep in all of this Egyptian God worship. So when they asked Aaron to make a golden calf, he knew exactly how to do it. He was quick. He was Johnny on the spot. He said, okay, give me all your stuff. And he had a carving tool and he could do all this stuff. I mean, he was well versed in how to do Egyptian God worship. So I just thought that was interesting, and people were talking about numbers. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Libby. That's a really, really good point. He was well versed in how to do that. Yeah, I can understand that. That, you know, that adds a whole bunch more to it. You know, and he could facilitate it right quick. Bang! Here's your evil molten calf, whatever. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for that, Libby. Appreciate your comments. We don't have.
But it's interesting. It's interesting though that the rest of the tribe of Levi didn't get snared in this. That's what always puzzled me. And I'm going to be asking Aaron that question when I see him. Is like, why did you do that? I don't know. The rest of the tribe of Levi, there would have been those older and younger than him, but they didn't. So lots of questions around that story.
Jeanette, did I see you had your hand up? Can't hear you. Got to turn your mic on.
I had another thought come to me. There's so much focus, especially in the Messianic community and us that come out of it, and scriptures we've learned that say the 2 sticks must come together. And I can't remember if it exactly says that it has to be the 10 tribes of Israel coming together with Judah, you know, because that's what is being taught. But, you know, this makes more sense, that the Melchizedek is the 2 sticks coming together. Like, it just makes sense, you know? It's the Melchi, the Melchi part of it, the leadership, the kingship part has to come back together with the priesthood. They're supposed to be one in both. So that's pretty cool. That would be a cool study.
Maybe I can just add to that a little bit right now, because it's been on my mind. It seems to me when we looked at the genealogy in Matthew, that takes you back through the line of basically Mary, mother of Yahusha, and the tribes of Aaron and Levi. Okay, that's your priesthood. When you look at the genealogy in Luke, it takes you back through the tribe of Judah and the kings. So that's why the genealogies between Matthew and Luke are so different. One is the line of the priesthood and one is the line of the leadership. And I haven't massaged all of that yet. And then it all works together with the 75. So there might be something there that, you know, it's a big study. So yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Jeanette.
Yeah, cool.
Go ahead, Sharon.
And the original plan of Yah was what? That we become a kingdom of priests. And so he's bringing that back into order. And what she just said, Charlene said about the 2 different lines, that just brought me to the fact that Mosheh was outside the tent, outside the camp, that he didn't want to mix the altar of a Melchizedek and what they had been doing. So he separated himself. So Mosheh was teaching his children and his family about the Melchizedek. And I'm wondering, Charlene, if that could be the leadership line of Luke. Anyway, just a thought.
Mhm.
I love these
Uh,
thoughts.
Yeah, Moses is from the tribe of Levi, so that that would have to fit in there with Matthew. It's a big study, and believe me, everybody, when I started reading my Bible through the first several years, way back 20 years ago, you know how it is when you get to the genealogies, you just say, I'll just skip them because you just don't know why they're in there and why they're important. Well, they are important, but that's one huge study. There's lots of genealogies in the Old Testament, but those two in Matthew and Luke, those are the, as far as I can say, those are the trump genealogies that show you what's happening with that priesthood. That's how it comes together. And it all comes together in Yahusha. From Mary's side, not from Joseph, the stepfather, but from Yahusha being born in Judah. His citizenship was in Judah, connected to the line of the kings. His citizenship wasn't through Joseph, the stepfather. It was because of where he was born. So that's kind of interesting too.
One more thing is that he would have been adopted. Joseph would have adopted, and that was a typical practice. And an adopted son has the equivalent heir to a throne or to a dynasty or to a kingdom, whatever. So in that way, it fits as well through adoption. Yeah.
And Moshe being the
Wow.
line of Melchizedek's, which was who is the very first one, is Yahuwah. And so that line, it goes back further than just the Levitical line there. So that's just my thought.
Okay, Danon, you got your hand up?
I do. I got tunnel vision this morning, man. I got my eyes up in the sky. Moses and Joshua knew the Mazzaroth. They knew it like the back of their hands. And when he came down off the mount, I'll bet you they were looking up in the sky and getting a reading. And it was confirming inside Moses and Joshua that they were doing the right thing. You know, the object lessons are outrageous. I really want to see what was in the sky picture during that time. Does anybody know the date, the correct date, so I can go back in the heavens and look at what was in the sky? I bet you it's the same judgment scene that's in the sky today, because it always happens during this time. When you go to the Mazzaroth, it expounds on the feasts. And during this feast, it's always in the judgment constellation. During the Feast of Tabernacles, we're in Betula. We're in the woman. So there's a story being told in the heavens, and it's a magnifying glass on everything that's happening on our watch right now. We can go to the heavens, and we can see exactly what's happening right this second in the camp. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
Danon, we know for an absolute fact, beyond any way, shape, or form, that the death of Yahusha was in the year 31. So I think with quite a bit of work, you could take that date, and because covenant calendar is so incredibly accurate, I believe you could go back and find the date of that time that you're looking for, Shavuot, back then. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I do believe it's possible, because what I have found with the accuracy of covenant calendar, it's just astounding and nothing short of it. Libby, you got your hand up?
Just wanted to share something that I came across in studying those chapters that just really was amazing, was that because, you know, so many people do not believe the Melchizedek priesthood predated the Aaronic Levitical priesthood. But as Charlene reviewed in the covenant confirming meal in Exodus 24:11, and the 74 were up there, that included Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, Aaron's two eldest sons. And so for that time period, they were all within the Melchizedek priesthood. They had just had their covenant confirming meal. So in essence, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu were Melchizedek's before they were Aaronic Levitical priesthood. So I would think most of y'all would track with me there. I mean, that's how I see it. I mean, because they had entered that same agreement and they had accepted the proposal and all of those things. And then they went to the covenant confirming meal. So they were part for, even though it may have been just for 40 days, for a short period of time, they were in one accord. So
I can track with you easily on that. That's good thoughts. Charlene, go ahead. You got your hand up.
Yeah, what I did is I wanted to track what number of priesthood Moses was, and I think I have it done right, but of course that's not in this study. That's going to be in that other study we're trying to finish. But it tracks down, it goes through Jacob, and then it passes to Joseph. Okay, so it bypasses Levi because it goes through the branch of Joseph. Of course, that gets you into Egypt, right? And then it tracks through Joseph's sons because it always goes to the second born. And then all of a sudden it ends and there's nowhere to go. But then it tracks down into the line of Judah, which is very interesting. And where the timeline ends with Judah, then it drops down into the tribe of Levi. So what I have, at least the way it looks right now, is that probably Moses' father was one of the Melchizedek priests. And when he died, then it would have been passed to Moses. But that probably was by the time he was in the wilderness. Some of the information around the times is a little bit sketchy. But when I tracked it out that way, it was very interesting. And it turned out that Moses was number 25. He was the number 25 Melchizedek priest since Adam. And so that's kind of interesting, that 25, and then you have that 75 in there. There's just a whole bunch of things that are happening with numbers that are kind of interesting that I haven't explored yet. So I don't know, that's out there for anybody that wants to research it.
Yahuwah, Father in heaven, we are so thankful for your feast, your appointed time. We are so thankful for the information that you have brought forth, that we can understand when to be on your time. And you cannot say that we have gone out of the way, because this calendar is strictly from the words of the scriptures. It has been worked out, painstakingly worked out, so that we understand your times. Father, we're here to honor you, and we have had such an incredible blessing of the speaking of Charlene this morning. It has been a huge blessing. The clarity that has been brought forth is just fabulous, Father, and I am so thankful for this technology that we can connect far and wide, people all over, across the oceans and different continents. And we can fellowship and worship and praise you and understand your word and be on the same page. Thank you, Father, that we are working farther and farther, working diligently to become in covenant with you as one of your Melchizedek priests. Thank you, Father, and I just wish a blessing on each and every person here today. And as we move forward, I want to ask for a very special blessing on Torah to the Tribes as they bring up their program a little bit later, and may each speaker be blessed. Thank you, Abba, as we close this out today. Thank you for your blessings and the privileges to worship you. Amen. Excellent. Right on. Bring those shofars with you whenever you come to praise Yahuwah. Let's hear it. Okay, everyone.
Okay, see you in a few hours.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Shalom.